These cooking hacks from the 1970s were so futuristic they could have been plucked straight from a sci-fi film. These clever tricks didn't just save time, they reshaped the way kitchens worked forever. Let's uncover how these groovy innovations made life easier back in the day. It wasn't always the norm for people to start using refrigerators. It took a while before most people even made that a part of their daily life. But how were they getting on before that? Lots of people used ice cube trays to preserve and store sauces and other things as well. You'd actually be so surprised at the amount of stuff people were able to save thanks to this simple little kitchen hack. Most modern homes use silicone molds, but ice cube trays used to be the go-to. They were compact, they took up really little space, and they made sure whatever you wanted was ready to go. Need ice for your whiskey? It's already in cubes just waiting for you. The same goes for all your sauces and your chicken stocks, because whenever you decide to get to cooking, everything will be available for you. Plenty of people still use this hack, but I won't lie just to make it look better for the video. It has definitely taken the back seat when it comes to storage hacks. I mean, there used to be days where people would even store their baby food in these trays. You know, that's a pretty long way to fall. Another really popular trick that pretty much became ingrained into everyday life was the idea to preserve herbs by freezing them in butter. Now, this might strike you as odd, because who does that today, right? Actually, this was one of the best ways ever to preserve your herbs. This technique was something that home cooks and gardeners alike found a lot of mutual appreciation for. It would extend the usual life of any herb miles beyond what was possible, and it would also make meal preparation an afterthought since you had all the herbs you needed right there ready to go. It's kind of like having the ease of access you get with something like a utility belt. Any kind of herb would work in this method. Thyme, rosemary, basil, and even tender herbs. People experimented with different kinds and found that not only does it do a massively good job of making sure your herbs stay alive, it also adds an incredible amount of flavor to the dish. In an era like the 1970s, where savory dishes and cost-cutting were common so that people could put their savings and paychecks to better things, hacks like these not only made life easier but made it much more accessible to try gourmet cooking at home, since lots of that involved using butter. Reusing pickle juice was really common, but you'll never guess that people were actually using it as a marinade. This had a plethora of benefits for you too, and I mean like, in every regard. It was the practical thing to do, it was something that was recommended in community cookbooks, and it was something that popular chefs were always telling you to do on TV as well. The reason was that pickle juice gave your chicken, pork, or fish a really sweet and tangy flavor that just worked so well with meat and enhanced the taste. Acidity, you know? It does wonders. Next, the vinegar in the pickle juice would naturally just make the meat softer, and that's something you always want, especially when you're short on cash and can't buy expensive cuts of meat this week. You go for the cheap stuff, find out it's slightly tougher than the usual stuff, you throw it in some pickle juice as a marinade. Plus, nobody likes their meat dry, right? One of the best ways to make sure moisture never left your protein was to help keep it in by using pickle juice as a marinade. Long story short, this thing does magic. As we keep going on in this list, the hacks are going to get more and more out of the box. I'm going to turn up the weirdness factor here with do-it-yourself yogurt made with a heating pad, which, before you ask, is indeed completely possible. This is because yogurt cultures always need a temperature between 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 100 degrees Fahrenheit to properly ferment, and guess what ranges heating pads landed in? If you didn't have electrical appliances to do it for you, and you couldn't afford to make a lot of room in the grocery budget for things like expensive brands of yogurt, then that didn't mean you had to live without it. People were encouraged to try making basic stuff like bread and yogurt during the 20th century on their own, before technology made it extremely easy to do everything. You could take a small mix of yogurt and live cultures, then place it in a bowl above a heating pad that was set to medium, and people would actually wrap the jars with towels so that it would stay insulated and retain heat. It was actually ingenious. I mean, sure, it needed to stay this way for up to 12 hours to properly ferment, but it was still genius. Plus, it was just cool, you know? How many of us can say we've made our own yogurt at home? So sharpening your scissors via aluminum foil is definitely something you think you would only see in an X-Men comic, but it's a real, tried and tested method of keeping those edges sharp. You cut through the aluminum foil, right? Now, this creates a nifty little concept in science known as friction. Along the blade's edges, the constant friction that's made when you cut through aluminum foil actually gets rid of any small nicks and dents in the blade, giving it a smooth, refined look once again. It helps to realign the scissors' edges and make sure it's well maintained. The last thing you need is one of those blunt pairs of scissors that just aren't good for anything anymore. Plus, most scissors back then were made using stainless steel or carbon steel, and that hasn't really changed much between the 70s and today. While this method won't completely get your scissors where they need to be if they're especially dull, it'll definitely help. Plus, sometimes you just aren't around a whetstone or a professional sharpener. Actually, all of the time. Seriously, which one of you just has a whetstone on hand in their drawer catching dust? Exactly. This quirky kitchen hack gained a lot of notoriety for being one of the most ahead of its time kitchen hacks you could come up with. A pretty unconventional method that was the perfect example of the kind of American ingenuity you could expect from a prolific decade like the 70s, where all boundaries were pushed constantly. And apparently, doing-it-yourself kitchen hacks were no exception. It was also noted by a lot of people as being one of the best methods for getting a large batch of potatoes peeled quickly. And in an era where casseroles, one-pot meals, and potlucks were dominating more than ever before, you can only imagine how much of a necessity that became. A stiff bristle brush would help a lot when attached to a drill because it would be an abrasive surface. You spin a potato against that moving brush, and just as surely as the friction will sharpen your edges, it'll peel your potatoes too. You throw those potatoes in some water too. That makes it all the more easier to get them barefaced and perfectly ready for your show-stopping main course. Just the way people made their own yogurts, it was actually pretty easy to do the exact same with your whipped cream too. It was a simple and hands-on way of doing it. You would just make your whipped cream in a jar. People use electric mixers or some niche tool off of Amazon today, but back then, all you really needed was a jar and a lot of commitment to the bit. This method was something that people prided themselves on because it showed how resourceful they were back then, but how does it all work, really? Well, I'm going to break it down for you. The heavy cream usually has a lot of fat, and it's typically 1/3 just that. When you shake all that, then it pisses off those fat molecules badly. They actually get into a fit and turn into air, which ends up creating that foamy, whipped-like texture we're so used to. We call that aeration. Next, the temperature matters a lot. You can't just be doing it at lukewarm temperatures, you need cold cream because the fat is usually a lot more solid in that. So with this, besides the practical use of it and all, people just did it mostly because it was fun. It was fun to shake the cream like a madman, it was fun watching the air bubbles get trapped and then seeing them expand, and it was fun knowing you did that on your own. This one works in literally every era, no matter how far technology and air fresheners progress and tell you otherwise. Boiling fruit peels for air fresheners is a timeless way of keeping those odors in check both in and out of the kitchen. The 1970s was also the rise of a lot of movements for natural and organic products, and that's a big part of why all the best do-it-yourself tricks to save time and money are right out of this decade. Why does this work though? I mean, you've heard about some additional benefits to eating fruits with their skin and peels, but as a way to kill bad stenches and keep everyone's sense of smell intact? Well, things like citrus peels, which come from fruits like orange, grapefruits and lemons, or even apples and pears often have essential oils that get released as soon as you heat them. Once you put those bad boys out into the open environment, you actually get a pretty nice and aromatic scent. It helps to keep things fresh on a budget, and you also end up smelling a lot like Mother Nature instead of a Febreze ad. While fruit peels would help maintain scents in the kitchen, you would need baking soda to do that inside the fridge. The soda actually works really well as a deodorizer, and there are several reasons for that. Sodium bicarbonate, or otherwise known as baking soda, is a slightly alkalotic compound because it neutralizes acidic molecules in the air. If you want to get pretty specific about it, the cause of an odor are violent compounds, but there's no need to get that deep into the science of it because the end result is always the same. They stink, period. And baking soda is what you need to fix that. It's a powder with a high surface area too, so you wouldn't need a lot of it to cover the entire fridge. Plus, I'm sure you're no stranger to this, but people's fridges have plenty of reasons to be stinking. Milk that goes bad, fish that gets spoiled. Soda helps to neutralize all these and just kills the smell entirely instead of hiding it under layers of fresheners. This one actually goes all the way back to the Depression too. People used to use fruit peels of basic fruits like this all the time because they couldn't justify making room in the budget for cans of air freshener. I guess some things stick around even when your wallet gets its shine back, huh? Cooking fish in parchment paper is a French technique known as en papillote, which by now is pretty well known across restaurants and the entire nation, but back then was still a niche concept. The 1970s was an explosion of foreign culture, new techniques, fusion food, and ingenious hacks like the ones we're going over today, so it's not odd that we saw such a traditional French technique finally being imported over to America. The science of it is basically that once you seal fish in parchment paper and get to baking it, the moisture from all the ingredients you seal it with, like the wine or broth and the vegetables, creates steam. And this cooks the fish really evenly and gently. Plus, sealing it means you're trapping all those flavors together, and that means they have no choice but to get absorbed. Since it is a steam-based cooking process, that also means the fish largely gets to keep a lot of its aroma and its moisture as well. Coastal cities in America, or ones with a predominantly large French community, loved this hack to the moon and back because it was an affordable way of trying out en papillote instead of spending $50 at an upscale French restaurant. Okay, but what if you had fish and no parchment paper? One thing you'll never find in short supply in American homes is cereal bags. And reusing those cereal bags as parchment paper was one of the best ways to save your money and time in an eco-friendly way. Why the focus on being eco-friendly? By the 1970s, a lot of the environmentally harmful practices had come to light, especially given how quickly the fast food industry was popping off. You had a Wendy's and McDonald's showing up on the corner of every street, and people started to become a lot more conscious of the waste they were spreading around. A big part of that also meant reusing materials and making the shift to disposable things so that landfills could be kept under control. Still, how does a cereal bag work in place of parchment paper? The recipe was pretty simple. Cereal bags were always lined with thin layers of wax and plastic coatings that gave them a bit of heat resistance, and while it doesn't put them anywhere near an actual parchment paper's capabilities, it still works neat as a clutch substitute. Do you know where some of these hacks actually got their start from? It was thanks to the Depression. I mean, before that, it just wasn't conceivable for a lot of the population living in the suburbs and the upscale cities and urban hubs to live like this. Only after that were do-it-yourself hacks like using coffee grounds as fertilizers for your gardens ever popularized. Did that actually work though? Let's find out. See, the thing with coffee grounds is that you can take advantage of their natural build pretty easily. What I mean is, they're loaded with nitrogen, which is something plants need badly to grow. It's actually one of the 3 things they desperately need at all times next to potassium and phosphorus. Then, they also just increase the health of the soil overall. Coffee grounds help trap air bubbles through aeration, the same concept we discussed when we went over how people made yogurt at home. They also help to keep the soil moist and help it retain more water, and that was because the organic matter that you could find in coffee grounds was good for binding soil together. Now, to the average Joe, none of this was knowledge he had, but what he did have were pattern recognition skills. You throw out your coffee grounds in your garden 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, you keep noticing a stark improvement in your crops, you pick up on it. Doesn't take a genius to understand that a clock works, only takes one to figure out why it spins that way, right? I love bananas. Do you? The milkshake you get out of them is wonderful. They're sweet, they only get better with each day, and they're a great source of energy, which is why and I hope you too, would be pretty surprised if someone told me wrapping bananas in plastic wrap works. At least that would have been my go-to reaction before I sat down for this video, and found out that yes, it actually does work, and yes, there's very easily explainable scientific reasons for it too. Still, it's odd. I mean, you never see it being stored that way anywhere else, so it has to be bogus, right? Well, actually, bananas have one issue that we all know, and it's ripening. They just go too fast and too unpredictably. Plastic wraps help a lot with this, and the reason they do that is because they trap the ethylene gas that bananas produce, which is a hormone that really speeds up all that ripening. Plus, nobody likes their bananas not moist, right? Plastic wraps help them retain a lot of that moisture. Maybe give it a try next time? I know I will. The thing about these hacks is that they just get more and more ridiculous as you go. Like, how am I supposed to take air drying my pasta on a coat hanger seriously? Yet it works. It really does work. Drying pasta on a coat hanger helps because the air actually gets to hit all sides of the pasta, and this means it dries evenly. When you hear the explanation, it's like, how did I not think of that? And when you hear the method, it's like, how did you think of that? At least that's what I want to ask the person who first thought of using a coat hanger of all things. Apparently, though, that's not the only benefit. Not only does the pasta dry evenly, but depending on how you space the pasta out, you can prevent it from clumping together, and nobody likes overly sticky pasta. Apparently, there are loads of reasons for why coat hanger pasta drying is popular, and I think we, as a generation, should probably give this a shot again. For the simple reason of it would be really funny watching all of your TikToks with pasta falling off of the coat hangers. This one takes the cake, literally, for being the weirdest hack out of all the ones we've had so far. If you want to keep your cake moist, apple slices apparently work wonderfully for that. Don't believe me? Well, an entire decade seems to disagree, and trust me, 2 hours ago I wouldn't have believed me either. Still, the explanation here this time involves a few basic facts you already know about apples. It's stupidly high in water content, at least far more than a fruit has any right to be. This thing is 85% just water, really. Placing them in the container of a cake or a jar will actually help release moisture into the air in the container. The cake is naturally going to absorb all of this up, and the moisture that doesn't get absorbed by the cake gets evaporated and creates a moist environment for the cake. It becomes this perpetual moisturizing machine, and I could have probably found 1,000 better ways to say that. In some situations, apples can even help take away any sort of excess moisture from your cake. If you've sometimes baked, then you might know that wet cakes are a pretty popular concept, and also a slightly icky one. Apples aren't just very moist, they're also really porous, and that makes them great at keeping moisture and absorbing it as well. Still, this might be one hack I left in the past, because I'd rather not have an apple aftertaste with my chocolate mousse cake. In the 1970s, it was still really common to have non-stick cookware. That meant that cleaning your cast iron skillet with salt was a pretty reasonable thing to do. The best kind to use was this super coarse and fine kosher salt thanks to the texture of it. The better something was as an abrasive surface, the better it would work to scrub away all the icky stuff out of your cast irons. If you add it to a pan with just a little bit of heat or some oil, then all burnt bits, leftover residue, and other gross things you no longer want associated with your skillet can go out the window. The reason is because salt crystals are just rough enough to lift away debris, but still soft enough to not damage the cast iron surface. This helps to give it an even clean and reset without damaging anything at all. Plus, it also helps to neutralize odors, and with all the garlic people started using in the 70s, that eventually became a serious concern for most. Using eggshell membranes to get rid of splinters is a pretty traditional home remedy. It works thanks to all the natural goodness you find in the membrane of an eggshell, such as how it is naturally a wonderful adhesive. This lets it stick to splinters and gently remove them from the surface, and since eggshell membranes also have a decent amount of collagen, they also help to improve skin healing. When you remove a splinter, you really want to do it in a way that avoids further annoyance and pain. The reason membranes from eggshells work so well is because they achieve this perfectly, and everyone always tends to have eggs on hand, so it's not like it's a big deal to get some. Plus, you have some added health benefits on the side with it. Okay, scratch the apple slices and cake jar thing, this is the weirdest one yet. Storing onions in a pantyhose. I'm going to give you a minute to just take that one in because I needed a moment too. See, this technique, against all odds, actually made the rounds in the 20th century because it worked really well. This was for a few different reasons. First, let's talk about the kind of environments onions like to grow in. They want dry places that are cool, they want them dark, and they want them moist, but more than anything else, An onion wants ventilation like a fish needs water. Luckily, pantyhoses are made of exactly that. The stretchy and porous fabric that people used for pantyhose production was actually the perfect thing to store onions in because of the excellent air circulation, and it would help extend their shelf life and stop them from getting mold or any kind of unwanted bacterial growth as well. Also, pantyhose storage worked really well because you could place individual onions in the hosiery and tie the knots between each of them. This would mean that all your onions would be separated, so if one was about to go bad and the rest were fresh, you could isolate that one out. Onions also help each other release gases if you put them together too close, so there's always that to consider. Using vinegar to get rid of any sort of stuck-on grease is a return to normalcy when you compare it to shoving onions inside any worn-down pantyhose, but let's get on with it. This one might not even be that much explaining, but I'll still do my best to throw in some fun facts you've probably not heard of. So, the usual stuff? We're going to get that out of the way. Vinegar is acidic, grease and oil is hydrophobic, as in, it really doesn't vibe with water, science this technical jargon that. Anyway, what you might not know is that sticking on grease leaves a lot more odors that build up than you realize, as well as a lot of germs too. Vinegar works as a natural solvent that helps break down a lot of these thanks to the acetic acid in it, and it also works wonderfully well as a disinfectant and a deodorizer. Vinegar is a natural at these, literally, and it also comes with some slight antibacterial properties that can just overall leave your skillets and pans a lot cleaner than they were when you were stuck to dishwashers and soap. Plus, if you throw in some baking soda paste in there, it gets a lot stronger and better at handling thicker buildups of grease. You only have to let it sit for 15 minutes to work its charm, too. A lot of beginners struggle with their pancake shape, and there's no shame in that. One of the best ways to do it was to make pancakes with a squeeze bottle, and the reason this worked is because of two things. The squeeze bottle would give you an incredible amount of precision, a lot more than just freestyling it, which is honestly better left to grandmas and veteran pancake makers. Squeeze bottles would mean you didn't have to pour the batter anymore or ladle it, and you could actually control the flow of the batter too. This helped lots of beginners get their start and helped them establish a sense for how the batter needs to be poured to achieve that perfect shape. Then, there was also the even distribution of batter. Since the batter didn't pool or anything, it would make sure your pancakes were even and fluffy from all sides and not just one. Still, there were some downsides to this hack. A lot of traditionalists believed that people got over-reliant on these sorts of items and hacks, and it meant that they couldn't develop proper cooking skill. But hey, they're just pancakes, and I need more sleep instead of cooking practice. The next time you break a glass, I want you to remember that potatoes can help remove it. That sounds like some quirky internet scam, but it really isn't. It's a tried and tested method of getting rid of any of those nasty shards of broken glass that make us liable to walk around bleeding all day long. Particularly when people were looking for safe ways of getting rid of shattered glass, they'd often resort to potatoes because of their firm and soft texture. The surface of a potato is very mushy. If you've ever made mashed potatoes or cutlets, you know that your fingers tend to sink in them a little bit. The firm flesh of a potato lightly sticks to and presses against the shards of a glass, and it helps because it doesn't break them into smaller pieces while doing so. The skin of the potato also helps to grip the glass in general thanks to its rough surface. That's the science lesson over. But really, how funny would it be to walk in on your sibling or mom one day as they frantically pick up shards of glass by pressing potatoes onto the floor? I mean, that's a waste of a good potato if you ask me. So, nobody likes boilovers. The pot spills, it's hot water everywhere. All just generally an icky situation that a normally sane individual would like to avoid. Preventing boilovers with wooden spoons is one of the best things to do in a situation like that, and it works for more reasons than one. The logic behind the wooden spoon trick is that when you place one right on the top of a pot, it makes this physical barrier that helps to stop the formation of bubbles when the liquid boils. This means that as those bubbles rise and as they begin to start touching the surface of the spoon, they break, and this helps to prevent a boilover from ever occurring. As you may have learned throughout this video, bubbles can be a real problem. Heat dissipation also really helps because of spoons. Wood works as an insulator, so it doesn't really work too well when it comes to vibing with heat. However, this does mean that you don't get any of that annoying foam either, since the gentle cooling thanks to the spoon helps keep it all under control. All in all, a pretty simple hack, and it's not like it hurts to try. But you know what does hurt? Boiling water. Spilling all out of your pot. Using wax paper to keep cheese fresh was a perfect idea for a number of different reasons. First of all, the last thing you want to do is have overly processed cheese. And if you use your wax paper right, then you keep your cheese organic too. Second of all, nobody likes cheese that's contaminated. It's also one of the easiest things to contaminate since it's such a draw for bacteria and mold. If you leave cheese unexposed, then, well, good luck is all I can say. Wax paper, on the other hand, really helps with contaminants like these. Whether that's in the handling, or in how you store the cheese, or even with things like how much light the cheese gets, wax paper helps create a barrier that protects your cheese and keeps it as fresh as it can be. I do really mean max freshness, because wax paper is also pretty breathable. As we know, plastic and aluminum foil are good for trapping things in, like with bananas. It's really important for cheese to mature and age, especially different types of blue cheese. If you try to keep your cheese with any kind of airflow, then that just won't work out well for you. On the other hand, storing it in wax paper helps keep a lot of that breathability and gives it the proper ventilation it needs. So as you can probably tell, this is a very big sponsored post for wax paper, and I really hope you guys start trying it out. Using mayonnaise to get rid of water rings from all of your wooden furniture might seem like something that's a recipe for disaster, but it actually works well. There's a reason these kitchen hacks are timeless. They were pretty much far ahead of the curve when it came to other tips people were trying out. Mayonnaise works well as a way to get rid of water rings because it's made up mostly of oils, egg yolks, and vinegar. The oils in mayonnaise, like canola oil or soybean, are a big reason as to why it's so good for water rings in the first place. What happens when you apply mayonnaise to those rings is that the oil in it starts to pierce and penetrate through the wood, gently lubricating the surface. This helps keep the wood just a little bit softer and also helps to increase the wood's ability to retain and absorb moisture. Water rings damage wooden furniture a lot by hardening the surface, so this undoes some of that dirty work. Wood is also porous, so it's pretty good at getting rehydrated from the oils that are present in mayonnaise. Plus, emollients like lecithin work wonderfully well as a natural emulsifier that helps get rid of unwanted residues. Next time you need to start thinking about getting some new furniture, maybe try a dash of mayo on your current one. Using hot knives to seal plastic bags is a method that's been around for ages, so it's only fitting that we end the list here. It was used in lots of do-it-yourself projects for helping people seal plastic packaging materials, and it became a popular technique thanks to how simple it was. I mean, really, all you need is a hot knife, and all you need for that is a lighter. Most plastic bags tend to be made of polyethylene, which is the most common kind of plastic. It's the one that's made all our grocery bags, too. It tends to have a really low melting point, so when you apply a hot knife to that plastic, the edges of it get just a bit oozy. You know how you grill your cheese just a little bit so it starts sticking to the chicken and the bread? It's kind of the same concept. Once you fuse the edges of the plastic together and let it cool down, you end up getting a pretty secure seal. This worked really well because you didn't need any kind of special equipment. You didn't need to pick up a new skill or spend a lot of time preparing the do-it-yourself hack that's supposed to save you a lot of time. You just had to heat up a knife and you were good to go. Plus, it didn't even have to be a special kind of knife. It could just be any kind of basic knife, and you were pretty much set. So, canned mincemeat was something you'd get for dirt cheap. I'm talking about barely 25 to 30 cents, which puts prices today to a world of shame. But who's comparing? I am. It hurts. We used to be a proper country. Boomers really did enjoy that time, and I can't blame them. You get chopped meat complete with spices and aromatics for that price, and you start to realize why and how these people were making pies every day. Anyway, you want to take a guess at how the mincemeat craze really started? When canned food first started appearing, the whole idea here was to advertise it in a way that really sold the "you don't need to work for your food anymore" factor. They'd say things like this'll help keep the wife out of the kitchen, and people would just eat it up, literally. Then you start having things like televisions roll around, where people largely just moved to things they could easily eat while watching and didn't take a long while to make. And you get how mincemeat became the iconic canned food it is today. To explain this one, we might have to take a bit of a detour and head on over to the periodic table, since there is some chemical work at play. Have you ever had issues with your sugar crystallizing while you were trying to make some homegrown candy? It can really put a tear in your mood and just turn you off from the whole idea. After all, any candy you would need or want is a convenience store away. There is something about homemade candy that just on a deeper level, though, and leaves you with less of a stomachache once you inevitably binge. So how do we get around this dilemma? If you just add a bit of lemon juice to your sugar, then it'll get broken down and be that much less likely to form crystals. This is all because of the wonderful substance known as citric acid that lemon juice tends to have in bucket loads. This acid breaks down the sucrose in sugar into glucose and fructose, and those just are not crystal material. Now you know, and now you can make some killer candy without worrying about any pesky inconveniences. Now who can go without some canned salmon? Funny enough, it's crabs and salmon that are actually some of the most expensive seafood you can get in the modern world. Back in the time of our boomer parents, they were such common catches thanks to the ever-so-lively fishing industries that it was impossible to spend a day without smelling some salmon down the block, especially if you were living in coastal cities. Pretty much everyone in those areas relied exclusively on meats like this to get by, and they had the nicest ways of preparing them too. You'd never get a bad bloat going that would make you want to stay indoors off of steamed or grilled salmon with rice. Plus, it helped that back then, we were still very much into exploring what other people and communities were cooking. So there were all these different ways of making salmon that never crossed anyone's mind before. People were suddenly experimenting, and there was enough of the stuff to go around. You've heard of buying store-bought pies and getting up to a serious baking session. Let me introduce you to canned and frozen pies, which were savory delights that were filled with meat. Usually you'd get more beef and chicken than you bargained for with these, but sometimes they'd come in fruity flavors too, because towards the end of the boomer generation, plant-based and vegan eating was starting to pop off. It was really a wonderful time when this first dropped, though. People were suddenly starting to have their most favorite comfort food available to them in the most convenient ways. Going to the store to pick up a pie was a treat, in more ways than one. It was nice to have something so familiar on hand like that. American ideas of a stir-fry often come from dishes like bok choy or aromatic heavy stir-fry that really have a lot of different flavors going on. The recipes that most home chefs and stay-at-home wives cook up is not that complicated. These stir-fries often include basic sauces like chili sauce, soy sauce, vegetable oil, and sweet chili sauce, along with standard vegetables such as lettuce, cabbage, onions, and whatever else you prefer. This gets you an easy dish that saves a lot of time and effort while still ticking the rest of your nutritional needs off for the day. It is also a great recipe to bring back from Grandma's arsenal if you feel like you need a strong source of greens in your diet and are not sure where to start. That is the beauty of a lot of these recipes. They may be decades old, but they were made and refined with the idea of lifelong use in mind. Plus, just like fruit bowls, you can mix and match different ideas that help you find your perfect veggie stir-fry. Try many kinds of recipes out since there is a lot to choose from. Not just one family was used to eating these. In a similar way, but also on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have no noodle pad thai, and I can already hear the disgruntled sighs from the traditionalists among you guys, but hear me out. It's not as blasphemous as you'd think. I know traditionally, you get pad thai with enough noodles to satisfy all your cravings, but this time, it relies entirely on fresh produce. See, the reason for that was that the landscape of America's eating habits was entirely different from what we're used to. Fast food hadn't taken off yet, McDonald's didn't have every minor in a chokehold, and Wendy's wasn't the go-to takeout for couples spending a lazy Saturday together. People were still eating zucchini and carrots and being health-conscious. Of course, that didn't mean they'd be healthy in a non-American way. Efficiency was still the name of the game, and that's why this no-noodle pad thai recipe took off as well as it did. You can have a bowl of lovely pad thai with all the flavors you're used to expecting in under 10-20 minutes on a gas flame or a stovetop. If you had some leftovers from the night before, you could just warm it up over a stovetop. It was a pretty refreshing way to go about your lunch. Buttered noodles are a dish so strongly associated with the elderly that they even have another name. Introducing Grandma's noodles, which were a staple of any family gathering back when simple dishes like this were still enough to leave a great impression on everyone at the table. The eggs made you feel great because they added a very warm feeling to the dish as well as being great for you. The butter itself was just the right touch that the dish needed and brought out the chewy sensation of the noodles so much more, and the overall flavor was something a mix between creamy chicken noodles and chicken cooked in butter, shredded and diced with vegetables. It screamed love in every sense of the word because it was a dish that took effort and, more than anything else, a lot of attention to detail to nail. But if that's the job, then there's no one better for it than the grandmas of the country. This one works your brain a little because it seems cartoonish in nature, but it actually works surprisingly well. Have you ever heard of cutting a cake cleanly with unscented dental floss instead of just a simple knife? While grandmas could obviously cut with both and give you a perfectly sliced cake, sometimes that pesky kitchen knife would be a bit too hard to find. Instead of rummaging through everything in the kitchen hoping to find it, what they would instead do is use the dental floss to cut through the cake. Apparently, if you had the proper technique, then it would go through like butter. Guess a lifetime of baking and cooking gives you all sorts of neat perks you can use in the kitchen, right? The idea was to wrap the dental floss around the cake and hold it tightly with both hands. Then, you would just pull in opposite directions and it would cut the middle of the cake, giving you two perfect layers. In particular, Oral-B Glide and CVS Unwaxed Floss were pretty amazing for this. Spaghetti, canned or dried, was just as available as hot dogs were, and equally in style. Again, we have to thank Chef Boyardee for doing community service on a national scale with these. Pre-cooked, tomato-based spaghetti for a few cents, canned and fresh. This is what modernization is all about. What's the point of all this fancy tech if we can't make eating food twice as easy as it usually is? Plus, you were getting some pretty good spaghetti. There were lots of concerns among new customers when this first dropped, because if something's mass-produced, it's likely that they're cutting corners somewhere or adding something to it in the name of additives and preservatives. But here, what you saw is what you got. It really is just spaghetti that could work for children or adults. People could have a cute date night at home with some spaghetti or feed their crying children immediately, and both would work. Chef Boyardee's was really the most popular pick by far for any kind of spaghetti-based dish, though. Out of all the canned spaghetti you could get, it was only Boyardee's that would have that perfect consistency. It wasn't overly tomato-y, not was it too creamy. The sauce wasn't thin, it knew how to do just enough, not too much or too little. You could reheat this in a microwave if you had one, or just pop open the stove and you'd be ready to eat a pretty serviceable plate of spaghetti. Plus, those bright red Chef Hector Boiardi pictures really worked wonders for the packaging. Just caught your eye in a store like nothing else. Would that work on you today, though? Or are we feeling lighter colors with packaging nowadays? Onions are often known as the perfect sidekick to a burger, a great pizza topping, an incredible addition to most curry-based dishes when caramelized, and of course, the star ingredient in the American favorite, fried onion rings. Yet in their base form, they are also known for having one heck of a smell. Onions can be pretty pungent and have a very strong flavor, which is often a bit too overbearing for some people. You can navigate your way around this and turn it into something much easier to digest by just soaking it in cold water for a while. By a while, we mean no longer than 5 to 10 minutes, as anything more than that will weaken the flavor too much. If your goal is to reduce the strong odor and soften the flavor, you'll be surprised at how effective an ice bath is for onions. So on a much healthier, French note, we have chicken amandine. This one was entirely dependent on how fast you were at sautéing. You needed to do that for the chicken. If you could get thin slices of chicken and sauté them in butter, Then you were looking at around half an hour at max. It was one of the most convenient French dishes we ever imported from them, to be honest, and it spread in cookbooks like wildfire. You even had celebrity endorsements for this. I mean, who doesn't remember Julia Child shoving this in our faces every other day? Amanda had an audience, though, and it was the most popular in big urban cities and suburban households. It was one of those dishes that seemed fancier than it is, which drew people to it. Plus, it was also convenient that it didn't need any kind of oven or microwave, just simple old open fires and stovetops. You needed a pan to toast the almonds in and a skillet for the chicken, which is honestly most of the dishes on here. Like I said, they're all built without microwaves, even mind, and that even goes for foreign recipes like this one. Egg salad was another classic that people would often come home to when visiting their grandparents for Thanksgiving or just on the weekend in general. Egg salad typically consists of mayonnaise, mustard, and green onions, which add both color and crunch to the dish. When you think of a salad, your mind tends to immediately think boring and unimaginative, but egg salads can toss those opinions right out the window with just one bow. Especially if your grandma left her recipe laying around in some journal or cookbook she compiled all throughout her life. Egg salad in particular would go very well with rye, and it would work as a sandwich too. Grandmas loved bringing this one along for family picnics. Peaches in syrup are pretty much the ideal sugar rush for a boomer. They don't really do too well with all the stuff the youth drinks for beverages and sweets. I mean, Nutella cakes drizzled with chocolate syrup is a bit much, and so is a caramel frap from your local cafe. Canned peaches with syrup just hit the sweet spot perfectly, though, and it's something that takes boomers right back to their glory days in the 60s and 50s. It could be served as a dessert, eaten on its own, or paired with other sweet snacks to give you a refreshing and fruity meal. It went really well with ice cream, and it was also a must-have if you were trying any kind of fruit salad. Lots of housewives enjoyed how easy it made party preparation and the amount of variety they could get with it. You could serve up to 2 dishes made using these instead of ordering out, saving time, money, and a lot of mental energy. Peaches in syrup were not only a pantry staple, but also a symbol of convenience and creativity in the kitchen. They were a key ingredient in boomers' favorites like peach cobbler, upside-down cakes, or even Jell-O molds that were centerpieces at every potluck or party. Beyond desserts, they found their way into savory dishes too, with ham and peaches being a surprisingly popular combination. The syrup itself was a treat when poured over pancakes, waffles, or even blended into drinks for a quick burst of flavor. I truly get the boomer's vision. So, pita bread pizza, it is a bit of a controversy in some places and a beloved rendition in others. Let's talk about it. While the Greeks pioneered pita 500 years ago, the pie itself came to town in America in around the 1930s when the import of Arabic pita bread started becoming really popular. This would eventually lead to shawarma stands and the like popping up all over the place too, but people did not respond as well to pita bread as they did to other wraps. Some people thought that it was just a bad way of making a pizza, while others, like home chefs and grandmas, deeply appreciated how easy it was. They saw the use in it, and if you knew what you were doing, the pita bread pizza was pretty indistinguishable from a proper pie you would get from Jerry's. Speaking of casserole, this one's a mouthful to say, but trust me, it's worth the effort. Neo-Life. Nest Dehydrated Stroganoff Casserole was this pre-made mix that just needed water added to it so you could get rid of that icky dehydration part of the whole deal. I get why they did it, because canned food that can't last is like a fish that can't swim. Kind of redundant, so it's all right. Plus, this thing always gets a pass for how close it actually came to imitating the flavor of a real casserole made from scratch. You had a creamy, beefy stroganoff cassie, which you could obviously tell is processed, but for what it was worth, which was just $1 or $2, and the amount of value you got out of it, nobody was complaining about a little bit of a powdery aftertaste. Stroganoff is definitely something that was more popular in their time, though. Have you eaten much of it, or is it something you regularly get a plate of? To support your cutting board and prevent injuries, grandmas would often place a damp cloth or paper towel underneath to stop it from slipping. This is something they would often do when teaching their family or grandchildren to handle knife work. usually when they would first begin drilling cooking 101 lessons into their skull. It makes no sense to introduce someone to the kitchen if they end up cutting themselves and never wanting to cook again. Small countermeasures like this went a long way, both in preserving all 10 of your fingers and your budding interest in making food. Also, everybody wants the cool knife skills, so they often tend to rush into that aspect. You would be surprised at how often people manage to hurt themselves with their own utensils. Around 350,000 people a year are injured by kitchen knives in America, and if placing a damp cloth gets that number down, then it is a pretty simple idea to put into practice. There are times where you just absolutely do not feel like getting up and doing anything, and in those times, microwaving some mac and cheese can be really helpful. We are sure most of us have memories of spending the nights at our grandparents' and waking up to some mac and cheese in the microwave, or coming home from school to a bowl that you could lose your worries in. The cheesier it was, the happier a kid would be after eating it, and even at this adult stage of life, a hot bowl can bring all those memories flooding right back in. Mac and cheese started growing in popularity when Mississippi farm families adopted it as a regular meal, and from there onwards it spread to a lot of families everywhere across the states. We thank God for that little fact every day, since we do not know what we would do without it. Golden syrup is this really thick sugar syrup that is pretty accurately named because, wow, this thing has a vibrantly strong amber hue. That kind of fits the taste of the syrup too. When I see amber-colored things, especially sweet ones, my mind goes straight to caramel. Does that happen for you too? We'd both be right though, since the syrup was caramel-flavored. It also had a sweetener that really sealed the whole deal together, wrapped in a neat little bow. You could use this for so many things, like making your porridge a bit more lively with this, adding it to desserts for some extra oomph, or using it as a drizzle over buttermilk pancakes. The possibilities covered breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so you can see why every boomer's home had this in their pantry. A lot of easy and no-fuss baking recipes like flapjacks and tarts were pretty much reliant on this syrup, and for good reason too. This thing really tasted amazing. Since the theme of the list so far seems to be hacks that make kitchen life easier and the life of things in the kitchen longer, a good one to talk about now is how to freshen up those limp vegetables. The ones that have more or less wilted away now and are just sitting there in your inventory, dying out, taking up space, not even being used because they seem to be past that stage. Things like lettuce can easily be brought back to life though. With some scissor work, ice water, and just a little bit of time, they are good as new. All you need to do is get rid of the parts you do not need, basically trim areas that are too wilted. Then just place it in a large bowl of ice water, pat it dry, and continue using as you would. It works literally every time. Do you want some ants on a log? What do you mean your idea of a wonderful Sunday dinner isn't insects on wood? Just kidding, it's actually just celery sticks that have been filled with peanut butter, which honestly is just as bizarre of a combination to me, but I bet boomers feel that way about half the stuff we eat. If they were really feeling themselves, they'd add some raisins as a topping. Still, the best part of it was that this was another dish that focused mostly on assembly rather than any kind of long, drawn-out cooking. All you needed were pantry staples and barely 10 minutes of your time, and you had a healthy, tasty, and buttery snack ready to go. No electricity, gas, or flame needed. It was really common in suburban households for some reason. But those neighborhoods are always eating something I'll never get. Not sure how this would end up today, but I'd give it a shot for curiosity's sake alone. What about you? Ever had peanut butter-filled celery on your bingo card for the year? Who could ever resist pancakes? Since we are visiting the all-time classics which last even today in almost every child's diet and life, it would be a crime to go without mentioning Grandma's beloved fluffy pancakes. Did you ever wonder what made hers so much fluffier? Pancake houses across the nation seemingly met their match when confronted with a 60-something-year-old grandmother who loves to spend time obsessing over her grandkids. So what is it that home chefs discovered that several brands and franchises could not? There are a few tricks they would use, like letting the egg whites relax in the batter before cooking them, or having impeccable flipping skills so just the right amount of heat gets to each side. Some would just whisk and beat their eggs and batter so well that you got one supremely thick stack of pancakes. There is this really convenient little product called Food Soft Silica Gel, and investing in a packet might turn your life around completely. If you find yourself cooking cookie or ornate baked treats, or if you just use frostings often, then this goes doubly for you. Silica gel as a preservative works for things besides food too, as you can also use it to take care of tarnish on your jewelry or silverware. It is important to mention that you should not try this with bread because you risk rupturing the packet, and the gel itself is not edible or safe to eat. It does work to keep all your oven creations as fresh as the moment you take them out. So try it out and let us know if it helps you. And if it does, you know which family member to thank. You might have come here expecting a meal that could make you completely filled. That's why I want you to meet the ground beef Wellington, which is a pretty nifty little rendition of a classic. Sausages don't really set the bar too high. They make for a pretty good snack, and in some cases, with a bit of creativity, even a pretty good meal. A main course would be something that could fill you up and have you walk away feeling like you're completely full. Now, back in the days before 1945, which is when the microwave was patented, making a puff pastry was a real pain in the neck. You could try, and a lot of people would, but it was something you needed a good reason for. Not at all something you'd rely on for a quick meal to wash away the hunger. That's where ground beef came in, and man, this was a national win for boomers. The thing is, it was a much cheaper and less labor-intensive way to make it, and before this, Wellington was mostly something expensive that only the rich got often. The best part was that it was something that just needed an oven, and the beef itself was something you could sear up in on your stove. You didn't need anything like a microwave or any kind of fancy pastry-making skills. After all, quick, tasty, and easy is the American way. Spam is the perfect thing to end the list on because it more or less summarizes the tail end of the boomer generation and the eating habits that were so prominent in America. Back then, you see, people were deciding, and I know this is going to be mighty unbelievable to hear, that maybe it was time to use one less slice of cheese, put the bacon down, boil some eggs instead of ripping open a packet of beef jerky, and just take care of yourself more. Eating habits started reflecting that too, especially with lots of parents constantly whining about how McDonald's was ruining their children and swearing up and down that it was America's downfall. In hindsight, they may have been right, but back then, people were scrambling for all sorts of ideas as to what could take up the vacancies in their diets now. Trying out your favorite ramen packet for the 1150th time this year for dinner? We get it, it is a pretty reliable option. Nothing hits that comfort food craving as well as ramen does. But did you know that back in the days of the early 1900s, when it was not so popular, most home chefs would spice up ramen with some basic additions that are so common today that almost everybody uses it as a default now. We are talking about ramen with eggs, which is something that you may be so used to seeing in every TikTok and short reel on Insta these days, but it did not always used to be like that. Home chefs were the ones who started the trend of adding things to your ramen, spicing it up and seeing what works and what does not. We have to thank them because they definitely hit gold with it. It was the same deal with things like glazed Cornish hens with pecan rice stuffing. I know that sounds like a mouthful, and trust me, it was the best one you could have. This dish did take a decent chunk of time out of your day, and that's honestly thanks to the stuffing and the roasting of the chickens. Perfection takes time, you know? Especially when you have a recipe as touch and go as this. Plus, the rice and pecans for the stuffing always needed to be pre-cooked and seasoned. There wasn't any local canned alternative or convenience food this time, so you had to stick to the old school way of doing things. All in all, the dish could easily take up to 2 hours thanks to all the processes involved, and it still didn't need a microwave. From start to finish, you can actually get everything in this recipe done on a stovetop. No microwave or oven is needed. After all, this dish has become a Southern and Midwestern classic. It makes use of a smaller bird, but thanks to the rice and stuffing, it really shines through. I just wish it took a little less time. But unfortunately, even having a microwave wouldn't help that. Some things just require you to spend time with them so you can really get the best of what they can offer. Throughout the Depression, the war, and every little bit of chaos after, canned bread was a constant friend, ally, and supporter of the American people. This dense, sweet, and spongy bread used to get that way thanks to a neat little trick known as steaming before canning, which really helped it retain that airy, sponge-like texture. This was used in war for soldiers as a part of government rations, and even organizations like the Red Cross would have it during many of their food drives. For just 20 or 25 cents, you could get some pretty decent bread, and the entire idea of this was to market how practical and convenient it is. I gotta say, it worked because people bought it in droves. Seriously, go ask your mom and dad about how much people used to get canned bread back in the day and how it was used for rations. They pretty much paired it with things like Campbell's soup or used it as a side for other dishes that involved bread. Not everybody even had an oven back then, and in an era with an increasing focus on hustling and grinding your way into a nice little retirement, the appeal of baking bread from scratch for a few hours wasn't really something people were too into. People have been putting things on top of crackers for centuries now, and enjoying it as a simple biscuit elevates meat, cheese, and just about anything else to a new height. Tuna salad with crackers was just one of many popular additions to the trend, and it is a fan favorite across the nation. Preparing the tuna salad takes a little time, but assembling it on crackers takes less than 10 minutes. Grandmas had so many recipes like this that they could just be made in a flash but would fill you up or be a kind of snack you have never had before on your own. Tuna salad on crackers is something you can make too just as easily, so give it a try if you ever have just biscuits and some tuna laying around. Now this one's really going to blow your mind. Imagine a world where you can get Monarch Alaska King Crab for just 50 cents, or max $1. See, that's my kind of capitalism. These days you go out on a date, and the idea of either of you ordering the crab really sets your finances back for the remainder of the week. Back then, it was literally in abundance. I mean, you couldn't go a day without your friendly neighborhood fisherman catching a fat, juicy crab that was just begging to be boiled. Of course, that meant that canned crab was an idea that wasn't too far down the pipeline. It was made to preserve the sweetness we've come to love crab for, and it was used in all kinds of dishes. Crab casseroles, salads, as a dip, or even crab sandwiches. The options were pretty broad. I gotta say, it must have been easy to keep in shape when all the protein you could ever want is that easy to get. How about you? Think king crab something you'd fill your cabinets up with if you were born back in our parents' days? While some dishes really need a lot of hand-holding and attention to detail, you'll never hear that from a dedicated fried chicken lover. Those people, myself included, live in the lap of luxury. You get what's arguably the most iconic comfort food of all time across the globe, and you don't even need some complicated recipe to do it? No glazes, no intricate fillings or baking processes? All you need is breadcrumbs, a good batter, and some juicy pieces of chicken, and you're good to go. It was rare to ever see something that could outdo a good plate of fried chicken. Not only was the entire country obsessed with the concept and the actual food, it was one of the most popular takeout items too. You couldn't really escape fried chicken no matter where you were, but that would go doubly for places like New York and the South. Plus, it wouldn't help that a lot of fast food chains started to specialize in that. Of course, this was also something that could entirely be done on the stovetop. At no point was there any need to touch a microwave. I know some recent modern dishes have come out that do use the microwave for fried chicken, but the oldest and most reliable recipes have always done it without relying on anything but a stove and their own skill. Canned sweet corn was pre-cooked and packed with brine and water, but it had this really soft and crunchy texture and also a natural sweetness to it that made it almost irresistible. Seriously, you had these soft but ever so slightly firm kernels that had a wonderful crisp to them, but not as much as fresh corn does. Plus, these were already pre-cooked like almost everything on the list is, so you were free to eat them right from the get-go as soon as you got your hands on a can. Originally, I remember hearing about how people were a little distrustful of this because the color was just a bit duller than what you would get on your usual cob. It was still yellow, but it was a little paler. Your parents probably know exactly what I'm talking about. That was just a side effect of the canning, though. You could have 12 or 15-ounce cans, and they were the pride and joy of so many corn-based dishes that did the rounds in neighborhoods and community cookbooks. With these, you could make anything from buttered sweet corn to salads, fritters, or use them in casseroles. You could even bake with them. Things like corn pudding or a cheesy corn bake were never unrealistic as long as you had the main ingredient ready to go. Plus, dealing with natural corn is a bit of a hassle. That wraps up my list of kitchen hacks from the 70s that were way ahead of their time. Which hack stood out to you? Comment down below and don't forget to like and subscribe.